What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part 2 of my ranking and reviewing Rush's studio albums. Part 2, the 80s. We got 7 albums. 7 albums. They managed to squeeze out 7 albums in the 80s. I think because they were there in the 80 and they were there in 89. They maximized their time. This was the decade in which I became a Rush fan. The first half of this decade were the albums pretty much responsible for me being a hardcore Rush fan. And then the latter half of the decade caused me to kind of check out. Still one of my best friends of ever, talked about in the previous video. He remained a Rush fan all the way until he was a firefighter, unfortunately. Passed away in the line of duty in the mid-2000s, about 20 years ago. But he was a Rush fan till the end. Saw many, many Rush shows with him. So these videos are dedicated to him. I had a fantastic comment pointing out all the similarities or all the connections to Frank Zappa. And a lot of them were like philosophical connections. It was on the last video I did when I did the albums in the 70s. I wanted to bring that comment up, but I forgot. All the connections to Frank Zappa, they were pretty cool. Rush actually opened for Zappa once. Did not know that. November 14th, 1975 in Indiana. Don't know if that happened more often than that. Peart and Bozio hung out together a lot, so there's that obvious connection right there. Some of their lyrics, the dystopian nature of something like Joe's Garage in 2112, the themes of that, anti-union stance. Frank had probably a little more to say than that than Rush, but that comment's in the previous video, but it's awesome. Thank you, the guy who left it. Zoltan Zabo, yes, thank you for that comment. It's beautiful. Love to read all those connections. And yes, no, I'm not the biggest fan of Rivendell, so I'm going to double down on that. Not a bad song, but not what I want at that point on that album. But anyways, yeah, that's all I got. Let's get on to album number 7 of the 80s. Number 7 is Presto, came out in 1989. This is their 13th studio album. This was the first Rush album release that I did not buy the week it came out after I had been involved in the purchasing of moving pictures almost a decade earlier. Not quite a decade earlier. But yeah, I did not, this one, I waited on and eventually got it. And I have to admit, I was kind of disappointed. There were moments throughout the album, moments where like, oh my gosh, Geddy Lee's bass, that is ridiculous. Oh my gosh, that's a great solo from Lifeson. Way too short, but finally there's a great solo from Lifeson. Oh my gosh, what's Peart doing on the drums? Always good. But those moments are kind of few and far between. And I find that a lot of these songs, and a lot of these with the next 2 albums on this list, there'll be great musical sections, like the intro is really cool, or there's like a middle jam, or even like an ending sort of fade out type thing. But like when we get to the verses and the choruses and the hooks, I find that those things just aren't as engaging. And I think the opening track on Presto is kind of indicative of the next 3 albums on this list. Show Don't Tell starts off with this awesome, almost like Jimi Hendrix type, what is that, Guns N' Roses, was it Bad Apples? Maybe, no, it's not Bad Apples. It's, well, like that crosstown traffic, almost like really dun-dun-dun, hitting, attack, kind of cool guitar energy. But then we get to the verses and that energy just kind of dissipates and it doesn't really feel to be connected to the song. And while Show Don't Tell is a bad example because they return to this cool energy throughout the song, there's a lot of songs on here that just have great starts or a great middle section and a great driving bass thing, but then the songs themselves I just don't think deliver. I think the best song on here might be the closing song, Available Light, which has like this piano ballad type, very sparse. I think it's just like chords that are repeated, kind of cool energy. I feel this song has like the most space, that it's maybe the most, I think there's a lot of production going on and there's still a lot of going on, but it just feels the most relaxed and doesn't feel as chaotic and hectic as the rest of the album. Kind of jammy, little nice soaring Lifeson solo in there. And it's also one of the longest songs. But I think the last song, I think it's the best song on here. It feels more relaxed. Chain Lightning, the second song's okay, but the lyrics are like a lot of like dense lyrics where I'm like, I get what you're saying. I understand the ideas, but I don't know what the point is. Some nice, Chain Lightning is actually a pretty good song. The first 2 songs give me hope, but then I don't think it delivers. The Past, which I think is about people doing things with their lives they maybe shouldn't, kind of has a follow up to Subdivisions, only the people in Subdivisions, it didn't turn out so well, but it has that sort of rebellious teen or angsty teen or misfit teen vibe to it. So lyrically, there's a hope in there, but I don't think musically it does anything. Warpaint doesn't do anything. Scars, really nice driving bass energy in Scars. Presto, if I could wave my magic wand, I would make this album sound different. Superconductor, kind of fast, tighter rock stuff. Anagram, kind of forgettable. Red Tide, keyboard sounds don't bother me. I like synthesizers. I like the keyboards. The 80s production, there are albums I love that sound undeniably 80s because the songwriting is fantastic. For the most part, I can forgive bad production if the songwriting's good. Red Tide has one of the worst keyboard sounds I've ever heard. The keyboard sound for Red Tide, like Styx, not a big fan of Styx, but one thing that really bothers me, I think some of the keyboard choices that Styx makes throughout their career are horrible. Red Tide, not even Dennis DeYoung would have chosen that sound. It's not there for very long, but man, I don't like it. Hand Over Fist, kind of generic rock. Nice, cool guitar parts, but they're really short. And then the closing, Available Light. Not a horrible album. There are always moments. The band are still some of the three best musicians ever. But it's just kind of forgettable. Presto. Make it not forgettable. But yeah, that's my number 7. Before we get to number 6, Hold Your Fire, which came out in 1987 and is their 12th, I'm always surprised that Presto does not have an exclamation point officially in its title. I don't know why. It just seems like it should. And not for good reasons, but it seems like, yeah, they did that. But they did it, so good. Anyways, that's aside. Hold Your Fire, the last album I bought, the day it came out. If I'm not mistaken, this came out my first day of high school, my senior year. In California, we didn't start till after Labor Day, and just because summers. Yeah, and we could not skip the first day of school, so immediately after school ended, I remember we got my friend Scott's car, we left my car in the parking lot, and we drove up to Warehouse Records, I believe is where we drove to, and we bought this. We both bought it at that time, on CD, I believe. But yeah, starts off fantastically. I think the first 3 songs are actually really good. Force 10, Time Stand Still. And Force 10 is doesn't sound like Rush. It's got some, like some production things going on and kind of some fun, swaggy type things that isn't necessarily straight proggy in any way, but it's weird and different. I like it. I think it still sounds great. I love just the bass and everything about Force 10 I like. Time Stand Still, love the ballady, flirty with ballady, but not really a ballad, but like the softer of that. Time Stand Still, love the Amy Mann part. I think that's fantastic. And Open Secrets. I like the third song, Open Secrets. A little bit mellower, but it has this really, really, really nice kind of bass line that it reminds me of sort of early new wave from a couple years earlier, maybe like a deep Duran cut or, something along those lines coming out of England, that kind of new wave, but kind of rocky thing. I like Open Secrets. Everything after that has its moments, some good guitar solos, maybe some good bass playing, always good drumming, but I don't think the songs are ultimately as memorable. Second Nature is one of those sort of piano ballads into like bigger, more epic sounds. It doesn't really work. Prime Mover, I think, is the first one on the album in which the production and the synths and the way too much just stuff going on hurts the song. There is a really good kind of cool bass groove that's there that's buried under way too many other things. And I think Prime Mover is the first time where I'm like, the 80s. Had this song been written 10 years earlier, bet it's a different beast. What else is on here? Lock and Key, Great Lives and Solo, kind of okay pop rock. Mission has that sort of what to me is just like this 80s sort of drive with emotion and just sort of this 80s just kind of slowly build you up type rock number. Turn the Page, really nice, awesome proggy bass opening, But as with a lot of these songs, we then settle into verses that I don't think are as engaging, though Turn the Page has some good moments throughout the entire song. Not that bad of a song. Tai Shan, forgettable, and High Water is not the concluding song that this album needed. Though there is High Water, I get solo Phil Collins vibes just because of the drum work and maybe like a weird 80s pop with a Phil Collins slow ballady type weird. Got some Phil Collins drum energy seeping in on some of these later half of the decade albums. But it's not a horrible album. There are some good moments. Starts off incredibly strong. But this is the 80s, and the early 80s is just ridiculous. Yeah, but that's my number 6. Hold your fire, please. If you love it, hold your fire. Comment nicely. All right, on to number 5. Number 5 is Power Windows, their 11th album. This came out in 1985. We're going back down the list in the 80s backwards, so I promise you that reversal stops after this one. Skip school for this one. This I know. Albums used to come out on Tuesdays back in the day, and this one came out. I think we were already deep into the first semester. It was the first semester, I think, of my freshman year of high school when this one came out. No, might have been sophomore year because my friend Scott could drive. He was older than me. I think he had just got his car, got a new Hyundai. Hyundais were new. Hyundais, they were new here. It was big. That's what he got. His parents didn't have money, but they worked their butts off and got him a car. Actually, it might have been a hand-me-down from his older brothers, guy who took me to my first BOC show. But anyways, yeah, we went, skipped school, met at his house. We went to the record store, went to Licorice Pizza, bought this at 10 a.m. We both bought this, went home and listened to it. Yeah. Starts off really strong. I think this is a pretty good album, pretty solid. I think the problem with the last two. Some songs start off great, and then you get to the verses or the choruses, and they're just not as memorable. Then you're in a solo section. You're like, man, that's a great solo. But then you go back to the song. You're like, doesn't finish as strongly as you want it. Opens up with Big Money. I like this 80s energy. I like the swoops. I like the production. The bass on that is fantastic. I think that's a pretty fun song. Grand Designs, I think, is a good song. I don't think it's a good second song. I think if Manhattan Project had even gone second, or maybe Manhattan Project had gone second, maybe the album's a little stronger because you're building momentum. I think Grand Design is not a good second song. Manhattan Project I like. Manhattan Project reminds me of Signals. To me, that would have fit perfectly on Signals. It's just 3 years too late, a couple years too late. But for some reason, very much reminds me of that album. Marathon, great guitar solo in Marathon. I think a lot of people like that song more than I do. It's not a bad song, but it just never went crazy for it. Territories, really nice, cool, kind of low key, kind of drum percussion vibe that just kind of like almost kind of simmers there for a while. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like, again, Phil Collins, but also with a little Police action, like something like a Police deep cut, one of their more atmospheric, kind of groovy like pieces. But then the keyboards come in, and then you get things that aren't good, and then the song itself doesn't really hold up, but then you get other parts throughout it that are fantastic. So Territories, which I think is the longest song on the album, yeah, it's like 6+ minutes. It's just one of those where there were some fantastic moments, but it's not sustained for the duration of the song. Middletown Dreams kind of also sounds like Subdivisions. They tap into that vibe a couple times. I think it doesn't quite work. It just feels like a lesser, like, like if they remade it. But it's like when they remade, what is that movie I just found out when they remade the guy who was in the Back to the Future originally? They remade, The Fly. When they made The Fly 2, right? Jeff Goldblum was the original. They remade it. There was a Fly 2, and Eric Stoltz was in it. Middletown Dreams, Subdivisions is The Fly with Goldblum. Middletown Dreams is The Fly 2 with Eric Stoltz. Emotion Detector, another one that just has some really cool beginnings to it, but then it kind of doesn't go anywhere. Has some horrible synth sounds, but then we get this fantastic bass heavy guitar solo, and you're just like, consistency, just a little consistency. And then Mystic Rhythms, probably one of the more intriguing songs on here. Moody, some nice almost Andy Summers-esque tiptoeing type guitar playing throughout it. Mystic Rhythms is one of those that I think maybe promised a more I don't know. I don't know if introspective is the right word, but a slightly different direction that I don't think the next two albums, which are Hold Your Fire and Presto, quite lived up to. Nor did they actually maybe ever get back to this vibe for maybe in the 90s or 2000s. But yeah, Mystic Rhythms, a good closer. But yeah, an inconsistent but at times great album, I would say. That's my number 5, Power Windows. Now let's get on to the really good stuff. Number 4 is Signals. Their ninth came out in 1982. This also came out right around the beginning of school. I want to say I was in 7th grade when this came out. Did not buy it the day it came out, but the weekend it came out, we rode our bikes to Licorice Pizza. My friend Scott bought it on vinyl. We went back to his place, recorded me a cassette. So I literally only had a cassette of this till I made it to college. When I finally bought the album on CD. I intended to buy it, but when I got there, something else had been released on this day, and I bought that instead. I can't remember what it was. I've been trying to find out. I fear it was Men at Work, because that came out right about then, and I know I bought that on vinyl. But something else, I'm going to try to find out what that is, but I'm not remembering yet. Great album, fantastic album. This was their follow-up to Moving Pictures, which, you know, there's going to be a letdown no matter what, because Moving Pictures is so classic. But this is, I think, 2 of the most listened to songs of my entire life. Subdivisions and The Analog Kid, the first 2 songs on the album. When I was in high school, we would drive around Friday and Saturday nights, going to the beach, which is about 5-10 minutes from wherever we started. Then we'd go to different parties or go see shows or stuff like that. But at some point, almost every weekend, when we were trying to amp ourselves up, the guy who owned the car, Jeff, would pop in this cassette, and we would listen to Subdivisions and The Analog Kid really, really loud. We would sing Subdivisions because that literally was the life we were living. We lived in the subdivisions. We kind of hated the subdivisions. LA and Hollywood and the city lights were off in the distance. And then the other way, towards the south and the east, it was darkness because nothing had been developed yet. And then we would listen to The Analog Kid, and we would do our best teenage guitar solo, air guitar shredding in the backseat, and that would pump us up. 2 amazing opening songs. Subdivisions, a near perfect song. And the use of synthesizers works. It feels, living in the subdivisions felt weird. Even growing up, it was an odd thing. I don't know why, but you just knew it. And then you hear a song like this, and maybe you retro confirm all your feelings when I heard this as a 12-year-old. But yeah, Subdivisions was like, they hear me, they see me, they speak to me. Chemistry's, rest of this album is pretty strong. Chemistry is great. Digital Man is some of the best bass playing ever. The Weapon is pretty cool. New World Man, one of my least favorite of their hits, but I don't mind the keyboard synthy stuff. Losing It is a really good example of what I think they stopped doing in those 3 albums I talked about. Where Losing It starts off like a ballad and kind of slowly just transforms into this really cool, almost proggy little jam thing with like a really cool guitar solo, and the rhythm section gets really funky and kind of interesting. And that sort of, it doesn't really all of a sudden shift gears and go into that. It's just this slow kind of ballady number just slowly adds layers, and the next thing you know it, you're really into this really organic feeling jam. And I feel like that aspect of their songwriting almost in those last 3 albums I talked about almost feels like we got this part, we got this part, we got this part, let's just stitch them together. Where this one just feels so much more like the flow of it is great. And then you get Countdown, which has one of the awesomest cheesy keyboard riffs of the 80s. We get silly sci-fi sound effects because it's like simulating a countdown of a rocket blasting off. Really nice groove that just kind of builds throughout the entire song, as a countdown should. Yeah, it's a solid album. I do think it's in the shadow of some of their all-time greats, but there's a handful of songs on here which are just absolutely fantastic. And the playing is always impeccable and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, my number 4 for the 80s is Signals. Number 3 is their 7th, Permanent Waves. Came out in 1980. Was not into Rush when this came out. Did not run to the record store to buy this. Though, of course, Spirit of Radio became all over the radio. for the rest of my life. So I knew that song very well. This album would probably be 2 if there were more songs. I mean, it's as long as every other album. They're just only 6 songs, and a couple of them are long. But yeah, it's pretty much a perfect album, as is number 2 on this list, and as is number 1 on this list. Opens up with Spirit of Radio, which is the band just in complete swag mode. That guitar riff, the reggae part, the solo, everything about this, I mean, undeniable. Free Will. Then they follow Spirit of Radio with Free Will, guitar solo, the playing, the lyrics, everything. Then you get Jacob's Ladder, which I think is the peak of their, like, they did the prog run in the 70s, right? And then they flirted with prog throughout. And this is sort of a flirting with prog type Jacob's Ladder. You got this very like dun 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 dun, very minimalistic like beat, almost like a Morse code like rhythm. And Jacob's Ladder, this ladder up to heaven. The song doesn't really, I feel like the song never really has this eruptive peak or this volcanic peak or this like real resolution. And you get this like climbing sort of musical motif. Then you go into this like, oh, the heavens open up and maybe God reveals himself, or you've reached heaven, but you're not quite there yet. And then the music kind of resumes with a little more intensity, but you're still climbing because you're not really going to get there because it's a completely foolish notion. And the end of the song, you really don't feel like you have that release that you need. But that's perfect because you shouldn't in Jacob's Ladder. You should never reach there because it's a goal to attain, not a destination to reach. But I don't know. Musically, the whole idea of Jacob's Ladder and all of it fits perfectly. Entre nous, we drop in some more French. It's just between us, though. A great little straightforward rocker, different strings, nice little quieter piece. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we get Natural Science, which is a streamlined, kind of a little velociraptor-ish version of prog song. Just has so much just great sort of like lean, mean prog energy. And it both Jacob's Ladder and Natural Science are definitely dipping in sort of the prog pool. Tide pools is one of the parts of Natural Science. They're definitely dipping into the prog tide pools, but they're streamlining that and really focusing on just the rhythm sections a little more, and the riffs in Natural Science are just endless and just beautiful. And oh my gosh, this is a great album. Like, this is a great album. Anybody other's discography, this is number 1 in the 80s and maybe the number 1 forever. And I wouldn't blame you if this was number 1 on your list. But it's a perfect album. It's absolutely great. My number 3, Permanent Waves. Number 2 in the 80s is Moving Pictures, which, yes, that means number 1 is that other album. Yeah, I love that album. This is their 8th, came out in 1981. Rode down our bikes to Licorice Pizza to buy this with my friend Scott. I ended up buying Hemispheres because this Moving Pictures and Hemispheres were on sale for $5.99. We went back, made cassette copies of it. I kept my Hemispheres. He kept his Moving Pictures. I eventually fell head over heels in love with Hemispheres. A little more than I did this one. But this is one of those albums in life I can't listen to anymore because it's like I listened to it so much in the 80s. Even now, I listened to it a couple of days ago and it was just like, I don't know. There were no surprises and I was able to hum pretty much every part. But the reason I listen to it so much is because it's a perfect album. This is a ranking of my favorites. If I had to pick a Rush album to put in a time capsule to say, this band Rush was a prog giant and this is what they made, I would put Moving Pictures in that capsule, not another album. Doesn't mean it's my favorite. I would put Dark Side of the Moon. Doesn't mean it's my favorite. I would put 4, Led Zeppelin. Doesn't mean it's my favorite. But those things, I recognize their greatness. It's just, Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, YYZ, Limelight. That's just side A. Ridiculous. YYZ, sorry. The Camera Eye, the proggy number on here opens up side 2. Witch Hunt, one of my favorites of all time. Just that's another one like Jacob's Ladder, which doesn't really feel like it resolves. Like you have this like dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, like there's almost like metal-esque type groove in the beginning that just stays there, and you don't really get that release of the tension, and you shouldn't, because the song's about people turning on people and xenophobia and stuff like that. And it's an ugly song lyrically that portrays the society we still sadly very much live in today. Still very relevant. And then the awesome Vital Signs, which I don't think gets as much love as it could. Just kind of upbeat and poppy and coming after Witch Hunt, kind of emerging out of the dark silence of Witch Hunt. It's a great closing track. Yeah, it's a perfect album, man. Moving Pictures. I mean, you got to start with Rush. You start here, because even if you don't like anything else, you've still listened to one of the greatest albums ever. But this is a ranking of my favorites and the ones that I listen to more. I don't listen to Moving Pictures as much anymore because I've heard it so often, but I recognize its greatness. But that's my number 2, Moving Pictures. And my number 1 favorite album of the 80s is Grace Under Pressure, by far. This one just touches me, touches my soul, touches my heart. I love everything about this album. It's their 10th, came out in 84. Pretty sure it came out around Easter. I remember I was in an Easter egg hunt with my family, and I'm the oldest of a bunch of older cousins, so we had the money hunt where there's dollar bills in there. Pretty sure I used the Easter money I found in Easter eggs to buy this album. It's probably their most 80s sounding album. There are definitely some electronic drums in there that I actually think work perfectly within the context of the album. There's a lot of synths, which I think work perfectly. But there's also some funky stuff. There's also some dystopian nightmares lyrically and musically. And there's also just some really, really, really great songs on here. And I'm not one of those people who pays attention to lyrics very much. Or if I read them, it's not what sticks with me. It's not why I return to an album unless it's like a Dylan or a Hold Steady or something where the lyrics, you kind of have to. Usually I come around to lyrics decades later, which is what happened with this album. I have loved this album forever and always since I first got it. And my friend Scott, who was the person who I got into Rush with, he became a hardcore Rush fan, Primus, jazz, all that kind of stuff. But he went down the Rush way. I went down more of a metal way, Zappa. But he passed away in the mid-2000s. He was a firefighter, got killed. And my current wife, we were dating at the time, but we weren't living together. And I received notification from my friend's brother that what had happened. Just devastated. And I was driving over across town, about 25-minute drive to visit my wife that night. And I grabbed a bunch of Rush CDs. I'm like, I'm going to listen to Rush for the next couple days because that was his thing. We went to Rush shows. I would fly out to like different cities and we'd go see Rush together. And Distant Early Warning came on, and then After Image came on. And I don't think I had ever in my life paid attention to the lyrics to After Image until that moment. And the first lines are, "Suddenly you were gone." And I was just like, whoa, what is this song about? And like the lyrics were just like, "Suddenly you were gone from all the lives you left your mark upon. I remember how we talked and drank into the misty dawn. I hear the voices." I mean, it's just about losing somebody who was close to you. And it had never dawned on me that was that about. I'm sure I knew the lyrics by heart. I was singing along with them, but I had never connected those dots until 20 years after this came out. And it was one of the most powerful musical moments I had ever had. The album was already probably one of my all-time favorite Rushes. Before then, or at that point, after that, it secured its place on the Mount Rushmore at the top. But the album is fantastic. Opens up with what's maybe like the pop rocky friendliness of Distant Early Warning, awesome bass, is that a Faulkner shout out? Absalom, Absalom. Always been a Faulkner fan. After Image, the song I just talked about. Red Sector A, this sort of dystopian concentration camp thing that has these electronic drums in it. This like horrible 80s sounding drums. But to me, that artificial sound works really well with the dystopian nature of the song. I just think it works perfectly. The Enemy Within, the Body Electric, which just gets 1001, just absolutely amazing. About a humanoid, we're in some weird dystopian future thing. Kid Gloves, the awesome Red Lenses, I see red. And then Between the Wheels, this sort of proggy, almost ominous, almost like doomy type synth heavy kind of closing song. It's a perfect album, man. Yeah, it sounds like the 80s. Yeah, there's a lot of synths and some fake drums, but I think it all serves the lyrics, and I think it's perfectly sequenced, and I think it's just, yeah, it's easily my favorite 80s album, Grace Under Pressure. That's what they look like in writing. Yes, that is Grace Under Pressure at the top of the list. I would say you have three interesting but flawed albums at the bottom, just inconsistent. You have one pretty good to great album in Signals, and then you have three almost perfect albums at the top of the list. I'm not going to combine the list yet. I will save that for the last video, just because we've gone on long enough. And suspense, and probably nobody cares what happens after this decade. So that's why I'm not going to meld the list till then. A little self-preservation here. But anyways, yeah, that's what I got. Pretty solid decade. Even Power. Yeah, all right. I just talked about it. All right, that's it. That's what I got. Let me know your thoughts on these albums, any stories you have, any further Zappa connections you want to share that you may know about that haven't already been pointed out. Always love that kind of stuff. But anyways, yeah, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share, comment, do all those things. And go listen to Grace Under Pressure and open your eyes to what an absolutely, absolutely perfect and fantastic album that is. Peace. Talk to you later.